Here we're going to spend time talking about how to set up an APA document. Now, when you go into Microsoft Word, you can search the templates for an APA style paper. It's a lot more detailed than the format for an MLA style paper. And when you're assigned a paper in APA, it's up to the instructor if they want to include or omit any of the parts that are involved in an APA paper. For instance, an APA essay begins with a cover page, but it could be your instructor says they don't want a cover page, so you would delete the cover page. Very often, page 2, the abstract, which is an overall review of your essay, a lot of times instructors don't require an abstract, so then you would delete page 2. I don't require an abstract. They're not really used for short essays like the one you're writing. Typically, an abstract is for a much longer paper. So when you're working with any APA paper, you should check with your teacher to see what parts of the APA they require. When you scroll down to page 3 of a full APA document, you then see things like level headings. Sometimes instructors don't want level headings, so you would just write paragraphs that are indented, just like you would in a traditional essay. But you need to know all the different parts because sometimes instructors do want all these parts, and you have to know how to handle them. So for our essay, I'm going to ask you for a cover page. I do not want the abstract. But I do want level headings because I want you to learn how to handle level headings. So I'm going to walk you through that process and show you where you're going to put your information and also talk about what these different elements do in an APA paper. Now, when you start with the cover page, the first thing you want to do is write the title of your essay. You want it to be a detailed title. You don't want it to be just a couple of words. Here is a sample title. I have included the different parts I'm going to talk about in my essay as well as the topic of the essay. For the author name, you are going to put your name. For the institutional affiliation, you actually are going to put the name of your college. Now at the top, there's this thing called the running head, and it asks for a shortened title up to 50 characters. Up here, you're supposed to look at your full title and then put in just 1, 2, maybe 3 words tops about what the essay is about. Usually it's the topic of your essay. So the whole topic of my entire essay is red tide. So that's what I'm going to put up here. Now, I'm not going to delete this part. You leave the words running head there. You see it already has a page number for you on the template. And here, you notice these are all in capital letters. So I'm going to type up here in all capital letters, red tide. That will take care of my cover page. I'm going to delete the abstract, and when I give you guys a template for this, I'm going to have this gone already since you don't have to do it. And then here on the next page, which used to be page 3, this is where my essay begins. Now notice that it already put the title here for me because I typed it up here. That's the template doing the work for you. In this section, this is where your introduction paragraph is going to go. So on your outline, that's section 1, where you had your introduction concepts, right? It should be 4 to 5 sentences with your thesis statement at the end and also your documentation. That information from section 1 of your outline will go right here. So this is where you write your traditional introduction paragraph. Here is where we get to the concept of headings. Now, the nice thing about APA documents is that when you're looking at one, it puts the subject in bold at the top of each section. So you know that when you're looking at it, you can kind of tell what is in the essay and what is in each section because everything is labeled for you. You have to know, however, how to handle headings. Just because there are, on the template, 5 different headings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, doesn't mean you're actually going to use them all. In a short essay, you're usually only going to use heading 1 styles and not use the other styles. Now, when you're creating headings, it depends on the amount of content that you have. The best way to learn how to handle headings is to actually look at an outline you've created. So outlining is really helpful when you're doing an APA essay. The introduction paragraph doesn't contain a heading because it falls underneath the title. So if you look at the document, for instance, you see it says heading 1 here. The original title is kind of the heading for what is going to be the introduction paragraph, which goes underneath it. When you're dealing with the headings, you take a look at your outline. This part here with the number 2, the big idea, is going to be a heading 1 in bold. So the disturbing aspects of red tide on my outline. I take that idea and I would place it here. So here I have my heading 1, which was the big idea of my section 2. Now, whether or not you use additional headings depends on how much content exists underneath it. If you're writing a short essay, 600 to 800 words, even up to 1,000 words, and you really just have enough content here for 8 to 10 sentences total, then you're just going to write the whole paragraph about the disturbing aspects of red tide underneath it. So you're only going to use this section. You wouldn't use headings 2, 3, 4, or 5 because you just don't have enough to say. If it's just going to develop one solid paragraph, 8 to 10 sentences, you just go with heading 1 and you write your paragraph there. But let's say, for instance, this was a really long paper. I'm talking 2,000 plus words. This is going to be many, many pages. And when I talk about the disturbing aspects of red tide, I have more than 8 to 10 sentences covering all the other points. In fact, this by itself, the red tide impacts on tourism, that is going to be 8 to 10 sentences by itself. And then red tide impacts on sea life, which is separate, that's going to be a whole 8 to 10 sentences by itself. To put all of this together in one huge paragraph would be too much. We want to separate that much content out so that the reader can see where everything is. So if this were a really long essay, you would start adding level 2 headings. So hypothetically, let's say this essay were huge and this were like a 6-page plus essay, and then all of my different A and B's, which fall under the idea of disturbing aspects, right? One disturbing aspect was the impact on tourism. And this section all by itself is going to be a huge paragraph. Then I'm going to want to separate it out at this point. And under heading 2, I would have just the impacts on tourism. That is one of the disturbing aspects of red tide. So what I would do is I would introduce my heading 1. Here I'd give a few sentences outlining the big ideas I'm going to present, the impacts on tourism and the impacts on sea life. And then I would have 2 paragraphs inside of this section, impacts on tourism, and then also impacts on sea life. So again, if you have a really large paper, you then have to start sectioning out your big ideas into their subsections, and that's what the headings are for. You could go even further with that. What if on this huge paper, this is probably, 10 plus pages at this point, but what if on this huge paper, for the impacts on tourism, I've got a huge paragraph just about North Florida and a huge paragraph just about South Florida. So this by itself is 8 to 10 sentences, and this by itself is 8 to 10 sentences. At this point, I want to add a 3rd level heading because I want to separate these 2 out. They're too big to go together into one paragraph, so I need to make them their own sections. So then you would build what is the heading level 3. So this is what the level headings are supposed to do. If you have large sections, then you want to start sectioning them out so it's easier to read. Just because you use a level 3 in this section doesn't mean you're required to use a level 3 in this section. Maybe this impacts on sea life is just 8 to 10 sentences and I didn't subsection that out to different types of sea life. So I could just use a level 2 there. But again, this is for a much larger essay than the one we are doing, but I want you to learn how to do this and how you're supposed to handle level headings. Typically, most students never go beyond a level heading 3, and that would by itself be a huge essay already, like a huge research project. Probably took you all semester to create that. Okay, but for smaller essays, if all you have is one body paragraph on the disturbing aspects, for instance, on your heading 1, if you just have one paragraph that covers the whole thing, and you don't have a huge paragraph on every single section of your outline, then you really only need level 1s. For you guys, going up to, let's say, 4 years of a college education, the most you'll probably end up using is level 1 and level 2. But again, you need to know how to handle headings just in case you encounter a huge research paper in your future. So for our purposes, you really only need level 1s. You'll have one body paragraph, which was section 2 of your outline. That section 2 is going to be 8 to 10 sentences, so you don't need to jump into level heading 2s because you just don't have enough content in an essay this short. So this is section 2 of your outline, which you'll label in bold above it for a level heading 1. And then section 3 of your outline, which was the promising aspects of the situation, that paragraph is going to be labeled and you'll write your paragraph underneath it. Notice that each paragraph is indented. When you're doing an APA essay and you get to the conclusion section of the essay, you do have to label that, and it is a level 1. So basically, all you have to do for your conclusion is you can label it conclusion. And then underneath that, you'll type out the conclusion paragraph for your essay. Remember, the conclusion should be 4 to 5 sentences, just reviewing the big ideas of your essay one more time. So now I've got my APA document set up. I've got the title up here. Here is where the introduction is going to go. I've got the level headings in bold. Simply label the last one conclusion, that's fine. And then I get to my references page. Now here is where you're going to go back and grab your APA references that you created. First of all, the one for base soundings, or if you use a different website that was approved, then that's fine, a different media site. And then, of course, your database source, your minimum one required database source. If you use more than one database source, then that's perfectly okay. Add as many as you want to this essay to develop it until you get to that 600 word plus mark. Remember, the 600 words is from intro to conclusion. So you got to check it carefully with the APA document because you've got a lot of things here, like the title page, that doesn't count for your word count. You can count the level headings though. So typically you go from the first word of your intro to the last word of your conclusion. Anything in between will count with a word count. So you'll put on your references page your documentation for any sources you used. Just remember, you have to use one database source, which was also required on the outline, and you cannot use additional websites beyond the original base soundings one that started off the concept for your paper. Everything else must come out of the database if you contributed to the discussion. When you put your references here, you want to do it in the same way, formatting-wise, that the MLA was done. In other words, it has to be double-spaced with hanging indents, and it should be listed in alphabetical order, not in the order that you use the information. Obviously, when you're writing your paragraphs up here, you have to include the proper in-text citations that should match in the APA style with whatever is on your references page. Once you've got all of that fleshed out, you have completed your rough draft. So I'll be checking for those elements, the APA style, the citations. Also make sure that you're not plagiarizing. Usually that's accidental. But remember, when you're using your sources, always put the content in your own words as much as possible. Do not quote unless you absolutely have to. If you absolutely have to, that indicates something like a term, a definition. You can't change the definition of something, for instance, or statistics and numbers that cannot be rephrased. So in any other case, you should always put it in your own words, but you still have to document even if you paraphrase. Okay? So feel free to email me if you need any guidance on any of these formatting elements or you want me to check anything for you as you're developing the rough draft for your natural sciences essay.